Welcome to USC Rossier's Leadership Month and today's webinar, Navigating the Job Search in Uncertain Times. My name is Matt DeGrush and I'm Director of Alumni Engagement at USC Rossier and will serve as the host for today's session. Before we begin, I would like to review the process for submitting a question for our panelists. Please type your question in the Q&A box that can be accessed by clicking on the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved time towards the end of our session for your questions and hope to get to as many as possible. We also received a number of questions via the registration form and have tried to incorporate them into the structured Q&A at the beginning of the session. If you're planning to share your experience at today's session on social media, we encourage you to include the Leadership Month hashtag, #RossierLeads, which appears at the top of the screen. Lastly, please note a recording of this webinar will be available in the next few days and a link will be sent to all attendees via email. And now I would like to introduce our moderator. Lori Shreve-Blake earned her BA in 1988 from USC and serves as Senior Director for Alumni and Student Career Services at the USC Career Center. And at this point, I will turn the program over to you, Lori.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt, for that warm welcome, and welcome everybody to Navigating the Job Search in Uncertain Times. It's my esteemed honor to introduce our panel of USC alumni, and we will start with our first panelist, Dr. Airies Davis, who is a 2016 graduate. She is Executive in Residence and Adjunct Professor at Dominican University and works in the Brennan School of Business. Second, we have Dr. Branden Grimmett, who is a class of 2020 graduate, recent graduate. He is Associate Provost at Loyola Marymount University. And our third panelist for the afternoon is Dr. Marcelo Vazquez, who is a 2008 graduate and Dean of Student Services and Title IX Coordinator at Ventura College. Welcome, panelists.
Thank you.
So we'll start with our first question of the afternoon, and we'll start with Marcelo. Marcelo, you recently went through a challenging career transition and job search. What were the key components to your job search strategy, and what did you learn that you'd like to share with our group today?
Thank you very much, Lori, for this opportunity, and panelists. It's an honor to be with all of you and to our attendees for this session. We hope to be of best service to you, and thank you for this opportunity. So thank you, Lori, for that question. In regards to a recent transition that I've had, in regards to moving on in my career, in my 21 years of working in post-secondary education, having worked at the California State University, at the University of California, as well as out of state as well, primarily with four-year universities, but still working with student populations that include students coming straight from high school, but also from community colleges as well. And so my community college experience was very critical in the transition and the goal that I wanted in regards to how can I start working at the community college. So for a lot of you, you may be working at the community college system, or you may be working at the UC system or CSU system, and you're thinking of how can I transition to another system, basically another language, another kind of culture. And so for myself, having worked with community college students at all those previous institutions, but never having worked at a community college, I felt I had a lot of experience working with community college students, but from an outsider's perspective and also from a within perspective with helping the students. So some tactics, some resources that really helped me. Number one, your network. So for all of you attending this workshop, your network is very important. And I know you hear this comment a lot, your network, your network, your network. And what is your network? That is a whole wide variety of people in your career that has influenced you in a positive way, in a challenging way, where you've kept those relationships intact. So that could be previous supervisors, that could be coaches, that could be colleagues, and that could be people that you're mentoring. And cultivating that network. And what it means to cultivate that network is to make sure that you're always reaching out to them, making sure that you're touching base with those people, not just for when you want to make a transition, but just to, again, just keep that communication flow going. So for myself, wanting to transition into a system that I had not worked in before, but I felt I brought a lot of value. My network in the community college system was extremely important. Mentors, colleagues who are working in the community college system providing me with some insight as to how I could very strategically, and making sure that the experience that I had with community colleges was in community college students was in an alignment with the positions that I was applying for. Traction. Super important. What I mean by traction is just making sure that every single day, because often, especially right now with this COVID-19 reality, we could easily get swept up in the day-to-day of our positions or just because of the life demands. And so by traction, giving yourself a schedule, making sure that every single day establishing goals as to how many positions you want to find, in terms of how you want to look into those positions to see if those are ones you want to apply to. Setting yourself up for goals in regards to how many resumes you want to create for the various positions. Basically, all of the mechanics of applying and going through the hiring process. Once you do that on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, then the hiring process is the hiring process. And I think we know that it's not a short process. It takes what it takes in regards to the time. And so, but if you put enough opportunities in the hopper, those calls will start coming in regards to opportunities to start for an interview. And then following through at the end, I want to be cognizant of the time that our panelists, my fellow panelists have in regards to answering their questions. So I'll just take another 1 to 2 more minutes. And then the follow through afterwards, because all of you, again, depending on what kinds of opportunities you're going to be applying for, it's always, again, this is about cultivating your network. It's always very important to close the loop. So you're reaching out in touching base with your network just to see how you could be a resource to others as well. And then when you want to make that transition, reaching out to that network and seeing who could provide you with that assistance, who could provide you with some insight. But then the follow through, at the very end, making sure and doing it because, again, the relationships that we build within our careers, and we all have these careers in whatever area you want to go into because you're passionate about what you're doing. And so that passion means that you're going to be doing this career for a long period of time. And because you're doing it for a long period of time, you want to make sure that that network is with you during that same period of time. So to cultivate that network, additionally, with following through with the people that have helped you, thanking them, appreciating their time, because again, you're building relationships, you're building connections. This is about, it's a human endeavor. And so besides the professional side, on the human side, you want to make sure that you are being respectful of other people's times, but at the same time, making sure that as much as others were a resource for you, you want to be a resource for them. I could go on, but I've reached my 6-minute mark, and thank you so much for that question.
Thanks, Marcelo. Yeah, I've heard somebody say your net worth is your network. So the beautiful part of networking is we can continue to expand it. So it's all the people that we have yet to meet that can potentially help us out. Thank you for that, Marcelo. Airies, our next question is for you. Disruptions to the hiring market are not new. So we lived through the dot-com burst of 2001, the Great Recession, the financial crisis of 2008. Here we are now in a pandemic. The question is, what currently is impacting the job market that are some unique things and ways that we can approach it to provide to our job seekers? Because these are tough times, but what are some unique approaches that you're sharing with your students at Dominican?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't first acknowledge my USC pillars from Rasier, specifically Dr. Patricia Toby, Also Dr. Castillo of the Doctoral Support Center, some other graduates, Dr. Little, Sharoni Little, and one of the most instrumental support systems that helped me through the process, USC Black Alumni Association, and finally, 8 founders of Jinga Doctoral Support Center, which was an organization founded by me and 8 others for Rasier to support with dissertation completion. So I had to get that out there, Lori. I had to share my appreciation. I often ground my conversations on statistics and knowledge. So the slide that you see in front of you really represents the disparities in our current economy. And it is very germane to issues that we all are very familiar with. For example, health and healthcare, economic, equity, technological, gender and pay equity, going back to the equity component. And then an area that is obviously of strong support to my journey is the Black Lives Matter or social justice issues. So I think just reflecting on the slide that's in front of you, I would encourage the audience to take a moment to understand where you are in this state. Our time calls for us to really humanize underrepresented or marginalized populations. And it calls for all of us to really show up as courageous leaders and listeners so that we can have courageous and sometimes uncomfortable conversations around policy change and allyship. So I think the slide represents the reflection of where we are in the current workforce. And I think it really grounds our conversation about where do we go in response to your question, Lori. Again, I like to start with statistics. So according to a recent article from the Chief Learning Officer publication, there are more than 40 million Americans that have filed unemployment during the COVID-19 and also during our social unrest. By the way, Lori, I was a part of that unrest that happened in the 2008 financial crisis. I was actually working for one of the top financial services firms in the world. So I can personally attest to the gravity of that experience. But having said that about the unrest that you mentioned in the past and also our current condition, there are thousands of US companies that are still looking for workers. So while we are focused on, again, the number of unemployed individuals, we also need to pivot our discussions and our conversations around the fact that there are organizations and companies that are looking for you. I call myself a practitioner scholar, coming from the Big Four and other Fortune 100 companies. And I have had to shift going from this world of corporate learning to this world of academic learning. And so a lot of the solutions that I've been able to provide have really centered on some of the discussions that I've had with my colleagues, but more importantly, the research that I have had throughout my journey. At Rasier, my dissertation, and I think it's very timely, it's interesting how things happen, but my dissertation topic was preparation for a global economy, 21st century career readiness and academic citizenship skills for African-American workforce entrants. And I think I would even take the African-American out and add any workforce entrants because I think a lot of it is very relevant. I like to also leave with key takeaways, and we'll actually start with 3. I think my career advice goes from more of a tactical to more of a strategic solution, and I call them the 3 eye-openers. Starting with the first one, innovate. Innovate. That is more about you. I am encouraging you to reskill your power skills. Now, some people call power skills 21st century skills or soft skills. I really coined maybe a different term. I call it talent skills or pivoting your talent skills, because I think right now it's more about you as the talent being able to develop and reinvent yourself. The innovation also speaks to being able to look at the competencies that you are able to either gain from your existing degree and or potential certifications or future degrees that you also plan to obtain. There are a number of courses that exist throughout the USC family. I encourage you to consider maybe non-degree opportunities, certifications, etc. I'm also a lifelong learner, so I have participated in online courses, and I know we're all zoomed out, but this is really helpful. But Coursera, Yale, Harvard, right now, a lot of those sources are free. So take some time to actually reinvent yourself with some of those power skills, the agility, the communication, the creativity, the critical thinking, the adaptability. We have the core skills, but a lot of times we're missing some of these power skills or power talent skills. So I would encourage you to innovate, first one. Second, ideate. This is about us, bringing us together. Ideate means just really thinking about how do I create like-minded opportunities with individuals who are pursuing similar goals. So for example, I am partnering with some of my USC Rasier alumni around journal submissions and creating opportunities outside of the world of education in the business sector. So these partnerships have allowed us to take more of an entrepreneurial journey and really kind of hone in on, again, those power skills that I talked about earlier. Equally, if you're not an entrepreneur, if you're an intrapreneur, that's someone who actually works inside of an organization, take some of the similar power skills or skills that you have been able to adapt or utilize in your existing state and consider ways that you can actually influence or make some decisions around career choices. I have noticed, even with certain searches, if I put in some of these power skills that I've been able to obtain, that organizations are looking for that in their search process. So a lot of times we think, oh, I have to have. A lot of times it's some of these other skills that are equally important. So we said innovate, about you. We said ideate, which is about us, bringing us together. And then I would finally say initiate. This is more of an external outreach in terms of your career strategy. This is about them. I say, think about your ways to bring in and forge community outreach and partnership. I am a very strong believer in service. I was actually going to, before the pandemic started, host an event here in Chicago as a part of the USC Day of Service. And I did not stop there. I continued my service in other capacities. So I would encourage you to also think about ways that you can bring in those moments of service in your journey. Interestingly as well, one of the positions that I captured at Monster was during a day of service. The individual said that I was spot on for the position that she was hiring and hired me on the spot, literally, day of service. So initiate that. Think about how you can create areas of wealth and generational options around service. So innovate, ideate, and initiate. Lori, I don't know if I'm past my time, but I just wanted to pause to continue the rest of our discussion.
Yes, that was great, Airies. That was amazing. So with that day of service, you were in the right place at the right time. And my husband always says, chance favors the prepared. You were also prepared to take on that new role. Great. Absolutely. Well, our next question is for Branden. Branden, your role overseeing a large career services operation at LMU allows you to have a deeper understanding of the concerns of our students and our employers. The past few months have been heightened with stress and anxiety levels around the pandemic, of course, recent brutal, senseless killings of Black people, and the demonstrations and calls for justice. How have these events impacted the population that you serve at LMU?
Well, thank you, Lori. First, I just want to thank my fellow panelists. It's been inspiring to hear their stories and their responses to those questions. I also just want to clarify that I only have one doctorate. There was a question already in the Q&A asking if I had 2 doctoral degrees. I do not. So one is plenty for me. But to your question, Lori, I think one of the challenges has been the layering of these problems, right? The layering of these challenges that we're all faced with. At LMU, I actually oversee a team of about 15 full-time staff members that are mostly industry-specific career coaches that help our students figure out, what it is that they like to do, what skills they need to be building as they aim for those different jobs, what the world needs from them, and then what's their plan for life after college. And in my particular institution, we're a comprehensive career center. And so we serve everyone from entering first year students to doctoral students, but also alumni. And I know that on the call today, we have both current students at USC, but also alumni and faculty and staff and even prospective students. So I hope that some of my remarks are beneficial to all of you. But the initial challenge at hand for us was, okay, this pandemic that we saw coming but weren't quite sure how it would impact our campuses is now here, right, in mid-March. I had actually been out on the East Coast doing some travel for an event that we were supposed to bring our students to in New York and later in Seattle. And we decided to kind of scrap that and get back to Los Angeles. And really glad we did that, because what we were asked to do is essentially transition all of our services to virtual. So, in a career center, obviously you've got a lot of career coaching appointments, you have a lot of one-on-one appointments with students. And we were fortunate to be in a position to have a lot of career technology investment that preceded the pandemic. So we had, an online job portal that had the ability to serve students virtually, et cetera. So we were able to transition that in about 48 hours. And I would say that a lot of the skills I learned, similar to the other panelists at USC in my doctoral program, came in very, very handy when it comes to leadership development and, just adaptability and accountability. So once we transitioned to online, the next thing that we were thinking about was, what are the stresses of our students, right? So we have students that are now back at home. Some of their home situations are better than perhaps when they were in college, but many of our students were in situations where they had internet connectivity issues. They might be in multi-generational families where learning may not be optimal, and other, limited access to resources. And so those unknowns about how we were reaching our students was really, really problematic for us to kind of think, how do we solve that in terms of building structures for those students? And so on top of that, of course, as has been mentioned, then the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black individuals at the hands of police, which not only forced our students, but really the entire country to think about, what does this mean for us? And I would say what our team kind of initially discussed was, it's not good enough anymore in today's kind of current mode to be only thinking about preparing students for an internship or a job, right? We're thinking about, how do we disrupt ways of doing things that are no longer acceptable, actually haven't been acceptable for a long time, but we've kind of gotten away with some of these things as a society. And so what we're looking at is, how do we not just educate students for having a great resume, having a great cover letter, being able to show up and to be in the right place in the right time, as Dr. Davis talked about, but even beyond that, to be able to say, how do I actually address, through the skills that I'm learning in college, systematic racism, oppression, systems of oppression within institutions, within our own institutions, within the employers that our students aim to join later, and really to help them understand how they can contribute to that effort no matter who they are. So what are your rights as protesters? What are your rights as advocates of these different initiatives? And so one of the silver linings of all of the COVID challenges initially is that, the four of us are here online, all presumably calling in from our homes, right? And so we are accessible in ways that we have not been before. It becomes a little bit easier to actually reach out and ask for help because, Fortune 500 CEOs, university presidents, founders of startup, companies are at home. And the challenges of getting access to those people is a little bit less right now in that environment. So what we're focused on as an office is actually building connections between students and these professionals who don't only share the identity of the students so that they can build meaningful mentoring relationships, but more importantly, the professionals that we're connecting the students to, how have they been change agents in their own professional lives? How have they identified the problems within their institutions? How have they forged a path in their own career that has elevated the voice of underrepresented people and marginalized voices? And that includes dismantling systems of racism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia within those institutions. So, the long and short of it for us is that I think despite the challenges we faced as practitioners in career services, all of this pressure has actually elevated the work that we need to be doing with students. And it's the work all career centers should be doing before, during, and after a pandemic within a society that still struggles to understand historic racism and white supremacy. And so we're making sure that we optimize all of that as much as we can. And then the final thing I'll just say is that, you know, each of us on this panel belong to different professional associations, and I think many of the students, faculty and staff, prospective students on the call are also navigating different professional associations memberships that really speak to the industries that they're a part of. There's work to do there too, right? So part of being a rising star in your profession is not just to do the work of your employer, but to actually do the work of the industry that you are supporting, especially so that when students see you showing up via, you know, digital, online, social media, they have examples of ways that they can actually model that behavior. And so for me, it's great to kick off this leadership conversation by talking about what's actually happening today and ways that we can support the students in those efforts.
Thank you so much, Branden, for that. And also the Career Center at USC, we had to quickly in 48 hours too adapt how we were serving our students and make that virtual. And one of the things that we were planning to have a career fair on Truesdale Parkway on April 23rd, and we immediately had to move it to a virtual and still offer that service to our students. So thank you, Branden, for that. Okay, we have 2 questions left, and we're going to let all the panelists chime in and answer those. And we have about 15 minutes to get through these questions. And we'll start with Marcelo. With so many jobs currently being performed remotely, what impact do you think this will have moving forward? And how should job seekers incorporate this into their strategy?
Thank you for that question. I think right now, what job seekers should definitely be highlighting in terms of this new COVID-19 reality is flexibility. You know, any kind of experience in regards to obviously the technology aspect, but any relevant specific examples in regards to how they've made the transition from providing a service that was on campus, the details, the know-how on how to translate that service off campus in a remote environment, and then the follow-through in making sure that that transition materializes the best way possible. Using data to provide context on the impact of that transition. I think that I know for myself, being on some hearing committees, and not hearing committees, I do student contact as well, but in terms of interview panels that I've been on recently in the remote environment, we're looking for those kinds of skills. And so that resonates very well with the everyday and the every week challenges that a lot of us are meeting in regards to how do we transition a service that was on campus and putting it to offline, or making it remote. So the data piece is very specific and it's very important to really provide that context. So if you're, for example, trying to address an information desk that was on campus, and many students are obviously going to the information desk to get their questions answered, but now you have to move that service online. What are the mechanics of you doing that? How are you partnering across campus to now manage the number of phone calls going to an information desk? How are you training those individuals? What's your communication with each of those individuals and with your colleagues in regards to how to make that service go online as efficiently as possible? And then providing some data in regards to the number of reassigned teammates from across campus, putting some samples together in regards to training materials. So again, it becomes a very, for lack of a better term, boots on the ground perspective as to what are the specific details in regards to how you transition something from on campus to off campus. That's very relevant information that we look for.
And Branden, if you could maybe speak to, I know a lot of I'm sure your students and alumni, they're starting jobs. As Airies said, employers are still hiring. People are still getting jobs. I've been saying, don't put the brakes on your job search. How are you advising students and alumni as it relates to starting a job remotely and building rapport with their colleagues and that piece of it during this pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had a couple colleagues, not on my immediate team, but on teams that I sit on that have joined remotely. And it's been very interesting to watch them, join a community and seek out guidance. And I think it's our role for those of us that have been at organizations that are welcoming new employees to reach out to them and make sure we build those bridges, because some of the normal everyday happenstance opportunities to meet new staff members just don't exist anymore. You can't bump into someone on Zoom. You have to intentionally do that. So it's a little different than what we would typically see if we weren't in a remote work setting. But I would say there's a couple things that we thought about and that I've thought about personally. The first is that, if we go back to mid-March for a minute and think about how we were all mentally and physically and professionally transitioning our work, every day felt like a week. Every week felt like a month. There was a lot to do and a lot of stress that we were under. And I think, I saw really highly skilled experts struggle with that transition, especially if they hadn't been in a remote work setting before. I think looking back on it now, a lot of us that are now working remotely day after day feel a lot more comfortable with the remote work, and we're all, pretty fluent on Zoom and WebEx or whatever we use. But it's important to actually name those skills that we used in that transition, right? So how were we adaptable? What did we learn in that transition? How was that actionable or measurable in ways that we were still able to show up, right? And for our students or for our customers. And so whatever industry you might be aiming for those of you in the audience, think about what the impact has been that you've been making. For those of you that are seeking opportunities, I hope that you have taken advantage of, and if you haven't yet, that you will do, take advantage of the fact that you can be preparing for a different job right now than the one you're currently in. There's a little bit more flexibility to learn new skills and to really take advantage of the online environment to expand your skill set, not necessarily for your current job, although that's important in any role, but really to think about that next job. And that's kind of a 101 of career services. I know those of us that work in that field understand that. The other thing is just, as much as I hate to overemphasize this, the job search is a competition. And it's important to remember that for many, many years, thousands of employees have worked remotely very fluently. So the fact that we've now adapted to it, many of us have worked remotely for the very first time in our lives, we are a little bit still behind those that have been working for decades remotely. And I just want to name that because it's not, in my opinion, good enough just to say that you are able to work remotely. It's almost like saying you have fluency in Microsoft Word. We hope that, increasingly there's no longer a need to put that on a resume. So think about some of those higher level skills that you developed. And so, have you mastered an actual content, resource in terms of higher education, Brightspace, or whatever the learning platform has been? Have you been able to influence people through remote work and through technology? Have you built synchronous or asynchronous content that's been delivered to different audiences? These are the kinds of things I think build upon a remote work foundation, but actually speak to a little bit of a higher level skill set. So these are the things that I think I'm talking to many of my clients about, and I know my team is focusing on as well.
Great, thank you, Branden. Airies, do you want to add to that?
Actually, I do. I tend to be very direct in my responses in a lot of ways, and I'm learning a lot from this book that I'm reading called Conscious Business Coaching, and it really just says about the importance of being explicit and direct in the way that you communicate. So what I would recommend is just that. So when you are going through your search process, research the market trends with an audacious lens. And what I mean by that is go back to who would have thought that we would have food delivered pretty consistently throughout our lives, or have a battery delivered to our homes through Amazon. So that ability to disrupt and be forward thinking in your process, I think is also important. And going back to the directness that I mentioned, share some of those big and audacious goals with the individuals that you may be applying for positions. You will be amazed at how many times you can have a conversation going in with one intent for that particular job search and come out with a completely different opportunity or a completely different job choice. And that has also happened to me, because what has developed, and it goes to what Branden and Marcelo mentioned about really tapping into some of those untapped potentials, that you don't know a lot of times that you are bringing your whole or your authentic self to the table until you actually do that. And that means, again, having that level of transparency in your approach. I also say pivot 180 degrees, go to where there's a need. So if we really look at what's happening in our current workforce right now, automation, technology, truck driving, and I know some may say, well, Airies, I'm not a truck driver, but here's what you are. You are, in some cases, especially from Rossier, you are an educator. And a lot of those city colleges and other institutions are looking for, they're desperate. And I can speak firsthand from some of the city colleges here in Chicago. They are desperately looking for adjunct faculty. And you don't necessarily have to have a core background in truck driving. There's some training that they'll provide as a solution. So I say pivot and go to where the job and the need is. I say to also be direct in terms of sharing your background and your expertise, because you never know who can utilize those skills and capacities. And finally, research the market with an audacious lens. Find out what's happening out there and go for the opportunities that are, I would say, the low-hanging fruit.
That's great advice, Airies. And I've said too, follow the money trail. And sometimes the money trail, the companies that are hiring aren't the Fortune 1000 companies. They might be mid-sized companies we've never heard of, but all of a sudden their business has increased because of the situation we're in now. So we have one more question that I'd like all of you all to answer. And Marcelo talked about this at the beginning, the importance of networking. We know that networking plays a critical role in the job search. 80% of jobs come through networking. However, the cancellation of conferences and events and gatherings has made it difficult. So what are some networking tips you suggest given the current situation? And we'll start with Airies.
Well, I'm hesitant to say what it is that I'm trying to think of right now, which is a lot of people throw around networking. I actually prefer to use the word connect agility. And what I mean by that is it's about building connections, long-standing connections and relationships. When we network, we tend to go with the intent to get something from someone. However, when we connect, that is something that has more of an impactful, again, long-standing relationship. So when you're connecting, here's something that I would suggest that you do when you connect with this agility trend that I'm suggesting. Instead of going in asking, what opportunities do you have? Can you hire me? You know, with this air of need, go in and say, what can I do for you? Going back to that question of supporting with the lens of service, what can I do for you? By that simple question, you will be amazed at the response that you'll get from the organization or the institution. Going back to the connectability component or connect-agility component, when you are on these social media platforms such as LinkedIn or even USC, I know Matt and team, they have a career connection component that I would highly encourage that you stay in contact with your USC alumni. But if you look at some of these mediums, a lot of times we're just massively sending out messages without any softness or warmness behind it. So I would also encourage when you're making these connections that you personalize the messages. Follow the companies that you're seeking to build those connections and those relationships. Follow them and then start to perhaps even retweet or repost some of the articles that they're posting. Follow some of the key decision makers or individuals that are influencers within that organization. and build somewhat of your own personal track of connection. Once that happens, then when you go onto these social media platforms and you're sending them a personalized message, again, not just connect, you can say, I read your article in Forbes that spoke about the importance of Black Lives Matter. I would love to chat with you for about 10 minutes in an informational exchange. You see how that's very different than connect? So, or pressing a send button via any of these other social media platforms. So I would suggest, as my takeaway as it relates to throwing out networking and replacing it with connect agility or connectability, depending on what you want to say, and replacing it with those terms.
Thank you, Airies. Branden?
I agree with everything Dr. Davis said. She's a career services pro. And so speaking my language for sure, I have a slightly different term that I like to use, which is normalized vulnerability. I think in professional settings, it's really easy to see people kind of on a pedestal and assume that they have never had to ask for help, that they've never benefited from networking advice or experience. And that is almost typically not true. And so just know that everyone has really gotten to where they are professionally because of someone else. And when you read people's bios, maybe it even happened with the panel today, what typically we don't include in our own bios is all the people that we talk to that have helped us along the way. And in our office a couple of years ago, we started transitioning how we talk about alumni that we bring to campus by including what's called an anti-bio. And so instead of overwhelming our audiences that are meeting with our alumni with all the great accolades, we actually talk about some of the failures in learning that those professionals have had. So it really humanizes the experience. So normalizing vulnerability is, I think, the term that I'll coin in this workshop today. The second thing I would say is, this question that Dr. Davis talked about, what can I do for you, is a good one. And I think just to connect the dots a little bit, you can learn a little bit more through your own research about what that person might say to that question. So just a reminder that when you have networking conversations, when you have informational interviews, you are in charge of that meeting. They have said yes to it, but you are showing up as the person running the meeting. And so if you get into that meeting and you say, okay, I'm here, let's start, they're going to wait for you to get that started. I've seen some of my students and alumni and clients be as structured as to send an email out a couple days before saying, here are the things I would love to discuss with you. And I think that's appropriate for many people. For more casual conversations, I think you can go in with just a more organic conversation. But just keep in mind where the dynamics of control are. It's really you as the requester asking for their time, and you should respect that time as much as possible. If the word networking is problematic to you, call it mutually beneficial relationships. That doesn't include the word networking. Sometimes students or younger alumni can feel like they have nothing to offer older or more seasoned professionals, but you do. Part of it is that you're validating that professional's experience by showing them that you care enough to hear their story. But oftentimes, depending on the industry, you are in a demographic of people that can provide insight into that business around customer service, around potential pipelines within that industry. So think about that as well. Network then apply. I'm just listing off tactics here. A lot of people spend hours and weeks and days sending out cold call applications without any responses. That's not the best strategy. The best strategy is typically to do your research, to network, to meet those people. And if you learn something in those networking conversations, to obviously reference that in your cover letter. Perhaps you met with someone at an organization, they encourage you to apply. Mention that person encouraged you to apply in the cover letter. So it's a straight signal to HR that you're already a part of that in crowd. And then finally, to earlier points that were mentioned, I think it can be somewhat challenging if for most of your educational career, you've been aiming for a certain industry or a certain type of job or company. And now because of COVID, there are maybe hiring freezes, or there are perhaps more depressed markets for the industry that you're aiming for. Stable industries right now include education, includes technology, healthcare, grocery, food and beverage, etc. But remember that within each of those industries, there are also other industries located in them. So every university hires accountants, every technology firm has human resources individuals, every healthcare company has marketing and graphic design people, grocery, hire logistics people. So expand your thinking a little bit as you consider who to network with, because I think a lot of people are open to different ways of helping. And I think right now, given the state of affairs in our society, everyone is giving most people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to just offering a helping hand. So my quick pieces of advice on networking.
Thank you, Branden. Marcelo, really quick.
Connect agility, like it. That's great. I mean, absolutely. Again, be proactive. Even if you see an alignment between yourself and someone you do not know, but at an institution that you believe aligns with your values, an opportunity that aligns with your career and what you stand for in regards to your importance in education, also reach out to them. And again, as Dr. Grimmett mentioned, to reach out, see where the alignment is, you're in control of the meeting. And just providing that opportunity to serve and building your network that way as well as your connect agility.
Yes, I love that, connect agility. And also it's important for me to announce that we do have an all new Trojan network at the Career Center. So we encourage you to, as alumni, to sign up, as students to sign up for the all-new Trojan Network. And one of the capabilities that it has is that you can see live how many alumni are on there that you can do live chats with. So tapping into our all-new Trojan Network and, of course, LinkedIn. And I think people are, from everybody's answers, people don't like the word networking. And I kind of talk about networking as a board game. You talk to one person, that person tells you to talk to the next person, who tells you to talk to 2 more people, and pretty soon you're going around the board and you have the job. So, and most people are willing to share their pearls of wisdom. So at this time, we want to open up questions to our audience. And Matt, do we have any questions?
Yes, Lori, we've actually been getting a number of questions in. Thank you for moderating the initial part of that, and for our panelists for providing such great insight. I agree, networking is such a critical part of the job search, and it's also one of the most daunting aspects for people who are involved in a job search. So I appreciate sort of the breaking it down to more simpler terms, or in terms that people are more comfortable with. But we have been getting some questions kind of taking us even back to some of the really beginning stages of a job search. And one of the questions that I think would be great to hear your perspectives on as panelists comes from Denise, and she asks, when potential employers look at cover letters and resumes, what do they need to see in them to say, this person is an excellent candidate that I need to interview?
Airies?
Simply put, authenticity. You have to be able to show and share something that is unique and authentic background that makes you stand out in that cover letter. So I would offer that as probably the biggest thing that I personally look for in the cover letter, and also something that is relatable. And it also shows that you have researched the company. So something that relates to current trends that are happening within the organization. So authenticity, and then that genuine research.
Marcelo.
Yes, I know something that we definitely look at, and I definitely look for, is alignment. And what I mean by alignment is when we go through that job description, we're putting together exactly who we're looking for a skill set to match a certain need. How well does that cover letter match that need? So super important to make sure that you're reading that job description, look at the verbs, look at what they're trying to do in regards to filling in that position, and then highlighting, being very intentional about how you highlight examples of your skill set that meet specifically those demands. Often we'll see cover letters that talk about other accolades and other accomplishments, which are great, but is not in alignment with what the position's actually asking for. So being very intentional in terms of how you are meeting the needs and the demands of that position. And again, using data, using numbers to provide the context about not just your experience of what you've done, but also just as important, and even maybe even more important, the impact of what you've done. So yes, you've done A, B, C, and D, but what happens when you do A, B, C, and D? What's the impact? What is the result? You know, so that gives some context that you are results driven.
Brandon?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been shared. Just a couple things. The first, you know, if you have two candidates that are both qualified for a job, one says, I've got the right skills, and the other one says, I'm motivated to work for this company for these reasons, the employer will always choose the person who's motivated for reasons that align with the company's values. So, you know, try to distinguish yourself from only focusing on the skills in the job, because I think oftentimes it's that motivation or that passion or what's driving you to apply in the first place that's very important. The second thing I would say is be memorable. You know, your average human resources professional is reading hundreds of cover letters a day. If you're at a place like Nike, 15,000 applications, you know, in a day or two. So that's not a person reading it, it's a machine initially. So it's really important to not have any kind of form letter to really adapt that. But most importantly, when it does come down to humans reading it, to tell a story, right? So that opening paragraph after you've introduced yourself should really focus on the challenge that you overcame, how you overcame it, and what the result was for the company that aligns specifically with what that job is asking of you. And if that's memorable enough, then later on in the search process, your name will come up as the candidate that they hopefully want to interview.
Okay, Brandon, do we have another question?
We do, similar lines, you know, off of the job search. So let's say you've done your networking, you've written a great cover letter and resume, and you've applied. We have a question here that asks about follow-up. And what would you recommend as sort of the appropriate follow-up process once you've applied for a position? Obviously, you want to stand out and you want people to notice you, but you also you want to respect sort of boundaries as well. So how do you balance that from being the passive person who's just like, I applied, I'm going to wait, and then not the person who's going to be overly aggressive in follow-up? Where do you strike that balance with following up? Because that's another way that you can highlight to an employer your interest in the position.
Great question. Who would like to start with that one? Okay, Brandon?
Yeah, I'll just be quick. I mean, I want to tie it back to networking. I think here's another important reason why, if you've done the networking on the front end and you've got an advocate within the organization that knows you've applied or even, you know, asked for you to apply for that job, the follow-up can go through that person as well. And I think oftentimes someone within the organization is able to be a little bit more transparent with you if they're not the human resources individual that is paying, you know, too much attention sometimes to making sure that they don't talk to any applicant for any job. And so I would say try to get as much kind of intel from your network within an organization to know where you are. But the other thing to think about is that the follow-up shouldn't just be for your own kind of cognitive benefit. I know it feels good to know where you are in the search, but the follow-up, if you're speaking to someone at the organization, is to also convey that you're interested and that you're persistent and you're doing that in a respectful way. If you're only doing it to reassure yourself that you're still in the running, then that's probably the wrong reason.
Airies?
I just would add a career search or job search, however you want to describe it, is it can take the span of a significant amount of time. Looking for a job is a full-time job, is what I often say. So with that being said, you have to be very strategic and intentional about your search process. So if the follow-up is a part of your concern, think about how and when and where you plan to embed that follow-up. And also think about standing out from just sending an email saying that, what's the status of my resume? Look at, again, going back to what we talked about with building those relationships, maybe professional associations or groups that these individuals may be a part of. Attend those events. I've actually attended events very purposefully and very strategically because I knew a particular person would be there, and I inserted myself in conversation like, oh, well, as a matter of fact, I applied to that position, and just casually talked through what that meant and just shared my background in more of a face-to-face stance. So be intentional, be strategic, but know that the job search is a full-time job. So you have to have a plan in place for that.
Marcelo?
Yes, another part of just making that lasting impact, because that's, again, you want to strengthen the opportunity of moving forward in the process, is if during the job search process, you have an opportunity to find out who's on the hearing panel, that's information, that's very valuable information, because again, you're trying to find a connection. And so that allows you to research who the individuals are, looking at their interests in terms of what they do at the college. And if something resonates with you in regards to a shared prior career experience, that could be part of your answers in regards to how you answer a question from the panel by being knowledgeable about what their experiences are. So without even trying to maintain a connection with the interview panel during a hiring process, you make that lasting impact because of you doing your research and you're trying to demonstrate the connection between you and the like-mindedness of some of the panel members.
Great. Matt, do we have another question?
Yeah, there's a question in the question and answer box that kind of piggybacks on a lot of questions that were actually submitted through the registration process around online networking platforms like LinkedIn. Laura, you mentioned the USC Career Network. We have one at Rossier as well, similar system, the USC Rossier Career Network. So there's definitely these platforms that are out there that make researching individuals and connecting easier. But I think, again, going back to the networking where I think people sometimes don't know how to proceed next. And maybe if the panelists could sort of share their sort of best practices or tips when it comes to an online networking platform like LinkedIn, what advice would they give to those in the audience?
Okay, Branden?
So my big pet peeve about LinkedIn in particular is that I think most people who have a cursory understanding of the tool think about it similar to things like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, where the goal is for you to put something out there that people respond to. LinkedIn is a little bit of that, but it's primarily a research tool. So there is no other platform in the world that allows you to put a name of a company in, to find out everyone who works there, to find out where they went to school, what they studied, what skills they have, where they worked before, what those keywords are. And so use LinkedIn not as a social media tool, but as a research tool. And as an example, because we're speaking to a USC audience today, if you search University of Southern California, USC, within LinkedIn, you're going to come up with the university page. And there might be some other colleges or schools within USC that you can also find. But what you'll find and discover on that part of LinkedIn is a kind of a sortable list of all alumni that are out there on LinkedIn, and you can sort that by their location, what job they're in, what industry they belong to, what they studied at school. And I think for the majority of people on this call, that's going to be a huge resource for you. And another tool that is somewhat unknown to people is something called Hunter. Hunter.io is another tool that if you just create a free account, you can actually search anyone's email address, anyone's business email address. So if you're looking for me, then you put my name in and then you put that I work at LMU, it will give you a confidence score as to what my work email address is. So my strategy typically when I'm helping students or alumni is to ask them to send the networking request email to their business address, but to mention that you found their profile on LinkedIn. No questions will be asked about that because they know how you found them. Some of those business emails are online publicly, and if it is online publicly, Hunter will show you where they found it and will actually verify that that business email is correct. So once I knew about that tool, it kind of changed the game for how I help students and alumni.
Airies?
Just really quickly, also be mindful of your social media footprint. So whatever choice you use to outreach about your career interest, Google yourself. Find out what comes up. Be mindful of what you are presenting out there, because I guarantee you, and I'm positive that Marcelo and Branden will echo, and Lori for that matter, and Matt will echo these sentiments, that we oftentimes Google or research the individuals that we may have interest in potentially bringing on board. So Google yourself, make sure that you are mindful of the social media footprint that you're putting out, and make sure that it has a professional lens as it relates to the LinkedIns and some of the other social media platforms that exist for professionals outreach.
Marcelo?
I like what Dr. Davis said. It's about your brand. What is your brand online? You want to make sure that what's being conveyed through your social media, through your LinkedIn, that it isn't, again, in alignment with what you want to convey. Be mindful of your comments. Be mindful of your comments as well. I mean, even professionals can sometimes air out statements, issues that are on your campus. You want to be mindful of that. So think about your brand. What is your brand? You are the Chief Executive Officer of You Incorporated. How do you want your brand to be exhibited online?
Great. I think another question that's come in, both, again, a theme in the questions submitted in advance and also in our Q&A box. It focuses more, not so much on current students or recent graduates, but mid-level professionals and people mid-career, and what a transition looks like for that person. Because, you know, obviously you have experience, and I think, Marcelo, you can probably speak a lot to this with your transition from into the community college system. So doing something that's a little different. What advice would you give to people who are looking to make those transitions sort of mid-career, already being experienced and established somewhere, and maybe want to make a change in a different direction, or need to make a change in a different direction because of certain circumstances?
Yeah, great question. I mean, you really want to understand what is that new culture that you're going into. So your research in terms of what is the language of that culture, what matters to that culture in terms of whether it's a K through 12 system, if it's a post-secondary education system, what is the lingo? What are the issues that they're dealing with? And so that when you do have that opportunity to be interviewed for a position, by doing your research, by reaching into your network or your connectability with others, that you are mindful and you're aware of what those hot button issues are and what the current trends of those discussions are happening, and then connecting your skill set to those issues. That enables you to get into the language of the culture, the system that you're trying to get into, makes you be able to better connect, and also sends a powerful message that someone on the other side can see that, okay, this person knows what we're dealing with. This person can bring resources to us that are very relevant to the issues that we're trying to solve. So really trying to understand the culture, the language, the issues of what you're going into, and then connecting your abilities to those issues.
Airies?
Just be patient and know that, especially when you're starting off with a new career or a new opportunity, or pivoting from something that you may be very familiar with to something that may require a new skill set. Just be patient and be transparent in what you know and what you don't know. Again, going back to being able to share that level of vulnerability with someone is just as endearing as it is going in and saying that I know everything. Well, actually it's better than going in and saying that you know everything. So just be patient, share where you are in your journey, so that others can support and get you to where you need to get to in terms of that new career. And then recognize that there has to be a level of patience in order to achieve your goals.
Branden?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that there's been a theme that I've noticed in mid-career professionals, just a little bit of a misstep that I often see, which is that going from one industry or field of work to another, sometimes what I see as themselves kind of showing that they're qualified is that they're interested in the work, right? But they don't always have the skills for it. And for those of us that have worked in industries for many years, interest, unfortunately, is not enough to get you the job typically. So what I would recommend is that you spend time talking to people that work in the industry that you want to work for and get feedback about what you've done in your past experience that is translatable, but most importantly, to actually find out how to translate your previous experience into future experience, because there's just no way to know, the lingo or the traditions or rituals of an industry that you've not been a part of unless you talk to people and ask them questions. And so get feedback, go beyond interest, and actually talk about how you translate those skills to the new industry.
Thanks, Branden. So at this time, we're going to begin to wrap up. And as educators, we always want to leave you've given so much great advice and share of knowledge, but we want to leave them with one item, our attendees, that they can move forward in their job search starting today, starting right now. And we'll start with Airies, if you'd like to share one thing that our attendees can incorporate today into their job search.
I would go back to the 3 I's, innovate, ideate, and initiate. So bring those 3 things into your search process in some shape, form, or capacity, and I think that it will be extremely helpful. And then also just finally, be mindful of your mind. Take some moments to breathe and practice mindfulness. This is an extremely stressful time for most of us, or all of us. I would even echo some other sentiments that were made earlier, but it just makes it such a difficult process when you're not mindful of your mind. So take a moment to really practice those levels of mindfulness as you innovate, ideate, and initiate your connectability.
Thanks, Airies. Branden?
I think what I'd like to go back to is just being vulnerable, normalizing vulnerability. Right now, again, the majority of people in our society realize that everyone's under a lot of stress. And I think there is often a helping hand, but only if people know that you need it. And so, when I see LinkedIn posts of people saying, I'm looking for something, almost immediately you get this swarm of activity of people, rising to the call to help that individual. And I think the corollary for us is to make sure that you reach out to alumni, reach out to past supervisors, reach out to former classmates, no matter who you are in this audience. And again, to remember that people that previously might have seemed untouchable or inaccessible are again calling from their kitchens, calling from their homes, and much more likely to help you right now. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Reach out, be humble in that outreach, but be bold in your commitment to ask for help.
Thank you, Branden. Marcelo?
Yes, as Dr. Davis and Dr. Grimmett mentioned, again, initiate, being humble, asking for help. The one word that I use often is traction. Every single day, just develop traction, develop a plan, follow through on that plan in regards to the movement that you want to see, whether it's, again, finding a job opportunity, creating a resume, finishing a cover letter. And then as those opportunities begin to snowball, you will see results in regards to callbacks for interviews and so on, but traction, just do something every day.
That's right. Thank you, Marcelo. And I'll just add a nugget of advice too. I would say don't put the brakes on your job search. As Branden said, do lots of informational interviews. He's always very kind. I've sent a few people over Branden's way. He always makes time to talk to them and have those informational interviews and meetings. And know that most people are willing to help you. And one person leads to the next person, leads to the job. So don't stop. Keep putting your foot on the gas pedal. So at this time, I'd like to personally thank our esteemed panelists, Dr. Airies Davis, Dr. Branden Grimmett, and Dr. Marcelo Vazquez for providing these wonderful, wonderful pearls of wisdom as we move forward and get that next job. And shall we all say, panelists, fight on? And then I'm going to pass it on to Matt, who will give the final words.
Thank you, Lori. I want to take this opportunity as well to thank you, Lori, for doing an amazing job facilitating this discussion, and to our panelists, and to you as a moderator for also sharing some valuable insights, tips, and resources. I'm going to take a moment and just share my screen here. And on the screen, you'll see a list of career resources available for current students and alumni through the USC Career Center and USC Rasier. And as I mentioned at the top of the session, a recording of today's webinar will be sent out in the next few days, and I'll also include these links as well in that email. When you close out of today's webinar, a short survey will appear. Please take a moment to provide feedback on today's session and share your ideas for future virtual programs. And don't forget to tag us on your social media using the hashtag #RossierLeads. Thank you for attending. We hope you will attend a future Leadership Month session. Have a great day and fight on.